What is the difference between Mozart and Beethoven? This is a broad subject. We could devote an entire semester or at least to this subject. But I'm going to touch on two facets that make them different. Well, first of all, Beethoven came after Mozart, so the development of his music was built upon the foundations laid by Mozart and composers before Mozart. Of course, the sonata allegro form was an important part of the whole classical period, which is an ABA or ABC form, where you have two themes in the exposition and a development section and a recapitulation of the first two themes. There's a video I have on what is a sonata form that you can reference for this. For this little demonstration, I'm going to pick two different sonatas. I'm going to pick the Mozart sonata K330 in C major and the Beethoven sonata Opus 14 number 2 in G major, a relatively early work of Beethoven. The things I'm going to talk about in the early works of Beethoven are even more extreme in later works. But I picked an earlier sonata of Beethoven to show you that their personalities are inherently different. It wasn't just the expansiveness of the forms and the development of the piano, which really entered into later sonatas of Beethoven. It really is the whole crux of his personality, the fiery personality, compared to the beautiful, sweet personality of Mozart. So first I'm going to play a little bit of the exposition, and notice the roundness of the phrasing in this Mozart sonata in C, K330. There's a kind of perfection, a jewel-like perfection of the music of Mozart. Everything goes just where you want it to. Every note is placed so perfectly that if you changed any one note, it would sound off. That's the perfection of Mozart. Now, Beethoven is a little bit different. Beethoven's personality is one of surprises. So, for example, one of the techniques he utilizes in his music is to set yourself up where something's building and suddenly it gets soft. The subito piano technique, and you'll hear it at the beginning of the Opus 14 number 2 G major sonata. Listen how he builds up and then suddenly down to nothing. Very shocking. Something you wouldn't expect. So whereas Mozart, there's that jewel-like perfection where every note is placed so perfectly it makes you go, ah. Beethoven makes you think he's going to do that, and just when you're lulled into a sense of complacency, he shocks you and keeps you on the edge of your seat wondering what's going to happen next. Another facet, a fundamental difference between Mozart and Beethoven is how Beethoven developed the form. Now in his later sonatas, his development sections are massive. Yet even in the earlier sonatas, they go much further than they do in a Mozart development section. Once again, the development section comes after the exposition, which introduces the first two themes, and the whole exposition repeats. Then comes the development section. So listen to a beautiful development section in the same Mozart C major sonata. It's delightful when that recapitulation comes, isn't it? It feels like you're coming home after a long trip. Very beautiful writing, how he takes those first two themes from the exposition and develops them. But listen how Beethoven takes the themes and goes further with his development section. It's not necessarily longer in this case, which his later sonatas really did, but listen how he really tears it up in the development of the Opus 14 number 2 G major sonata. It's quite a bit of difference there. Yes, there is more development in the Beethoven development section than in the Mozart development section, but it's more than that. How he goes further out from the mood of the original character of the exposition section. And as texturally, rhythmically, they're faster notes, a whole lot of differences. So we can sum up today's lesson about Beethoven versus Mozart, both jewel composers, but Mozart, the beautiful thing about his music is the perfect balance, going exactly where you want it to, exactly where you expect it to, where any one note out of place would ruin the whole thing. It's just such a perfect architecture. Beethoven takes it one step further, setting you up for the expectation of a Mozart type of sonata, but surprising you with subito pianos and taking development sections to places you'd never expect them to go. What makes Mozart so special? Well, you know, actually we could have a 2-semester course on this topic. There are many aspects of Mozart's writing that are truly brilliant. But today we're just going to bring up one point, which is something I'm sure you've heard, but you may not have heard this term before. It's called Alberti bass. Now, what is Alberti bass? To demonstrate, I'm going to play the famous C major sonata of Mozart, K545, without playing the Alberti bass. I'm just going to play in block chords in the left hand. Then I'm going to show you some variations and finally end up with the full Alberti bass. And as soon as you hear it, you'll instantly recognize it as something you hear all the time in Mozart's music. So those are just block chords in the left hand. Now there's a lot of things you could do to fancy it up a little bit, like just alternate like this between the bass note and the top two notes of the chord. But Mozart takes it one step further, and when you hear this iconic sound, you'll recognize it because you hear it in almost every piece of Mozart on the piano written. So simply breaking the triad into eighth notes or sometimes 16th notes, instead of just playing, breaking it up to the Alberti bass. And once again, to listen to it in context. And there are truly hundreds of examples of Alberti bass in not just Mozart's music, but it's also a common technique in other classical composers such as Haydn and Beethoven. The difference between playing Mozart and Chopin, they are great composers, lived in different eras, and there's some substantial differences to how to approach playing these composers stylistically with integrity that makes sense for the period styles as well as the instruments that they composed for. So we're going to start now with a little bit of Mozart, and this is actually the second movement from his famous Alla Turca sonata. Of course, the Alla Turca sonata you all know. That's the famous last movement. But what I'm going to play for you is a little bit of the second movement. And what you're going to hear is something in 3/4 time. And they're going to shift gears and play something of Chopin in 3/4 time. I tried to find as similar compositions as possible to show you the stylistic difference. Then I will explain why these composers are played differently. What is it about the crafting of these works and the period styles that lends itself to different performance practices? You're going to learn that all here today. So let's listen to a little bit of this Mozart, this minuet. So that gives you a little flavor of Mozart. I'm going to shift right over now to just a little bit of a Chopin waltz, a waltz in A flat, and listen, you're going to notice a difference right away. And I'm going to explain what I'm doing and how to approach playing these styles so you have integrity and are faithful to what these composers intended, basically. Even though there's room for interpretation, you still want to stay within the confines of what this music was really about. So you notice completely different sound. Now, why is that? Think about this. You know that the piano at the time Mozart was alive was nothing like the modern piano. Did you know that even in Chopin's time, the piano wasn't a fully developed instrument that we know and love today, but it was way closer. It didn't have 88 keys, but it had close to 88 keys, whereas during Mozart's time, it only had about 5 octaves of keys. The action was a primitive mechanism, so it was only so much you could do to get different tonalities. Not only that, but the whole sound of the instrument was more percussive, didn't have the same sustain, and importantly, it didn't have any pedals. So there was a certain amount you can impart with a lever operated with the knee in order to do what a sustained pedal does. But there's more to it than that. The pedaling, of course, makes a big difference in the sound. But you notice the fluidity of tempo in Chopin. There's a give and take. It's never gaining or losing time, but it kind of goes around the beat. This is called rubato. Rubato is really a romantic era expressive nuance that you can impart in your music, which is stylistically inappropriate for Mozart. Mozart and the whole classical era was all about form and structure. If you listen to more of this movement, you'd hear the different sections very well delineated and contrasting with one another with definite repeats. Now, there's some of that in Chopin waltzes, but now waltzes, like his mazurkas, his polonaises, and so much of his music were based on dance forms. Now, Mozart did also have music based on dance forms, but naturally there were different dances. And so there's a structure to Mozart's music, the clarity of line, the clarity of purpose, that everything is really in its exact place, and there's an architecture, and that's the beauty of Mozart, the beautiful way everything holds together. Whereas Chopin is more about the expressive line and the nuance of expression. There's more room for expression in Mozart, in Chopin, whereas in Mozart, there's definitely room for expression, but it's within the structure of the music. So the expression is within the service of the music, whereas Chopin, you listen to different performances of this waltz or just about any Chopin, and you can't even believe the variety of the interpretations that lends itself to Chopin, much more so than Mozart. So what else do we have? I'm going to also show something else, another couple of works. I'm going to start with Mozart, his sonata in F major, K332, the second movement. And this is a beautifully lyrical piece of music. Then I'm going to play also a lyrical piece of Chopin and the F-sharp Nocturne. And listen how, even though they're both beautiful and expressive, the Mozart, everything is very straightforward. The lines, everything is clear. It's not muddied with too much pedals, since there was no pedals on the piano at that time. And this is the kind of sound you would expect to hear out of a beautiful, this is the K332 F major sonata. A little bit of the second movement for you. And now for a little bit of Chopin, the beginning of his F-sharp Nocturne. So naturally, you hear huge differences. And in order to demonstrate this for you, I'm going to attempt to play the Mozart in a Chopin style with rubato, a liberal use of pedaling, very overtly expressive playing. And listen what happens to the Mozart. It doesn't really lend itself to this music. I'm warning you right now. Let's see what happens. And spoiler alert, I have not tried this yet. I have no idea what's going to come out. So this is going to be an adventure for both of us. gets too syrupy sweet, doesn't it? That instead of that nice, beautiful architecture and the simple line where every single note is right in place. Now, let's flip it. I'm going to try to play this. I haven't done this before. I figured it would be great to just surprise myself. So we stay engaged in the process. I'm going to try to play this Chopin Nocturne as if it's Mozart. Let's see what the heck this will sound like. You talk about losing the whole meaning of the music. Isn't it amazing how it doesn't work very well at all? It doesn't have that beauty and that flowing freedom that you need in Chopin. So once again, to encapsulate the difference between playing Mozart and playing Chopin, remember, first of all, the period style of the classical era of Mozart is all about form and structure. There's a perfection to the composition you want to highlight with the beautiful placement of each note precisely without too much freedom, trying to place everything exactly where it should be to give you a feeling of, like a jewel-like perfection. Also, the fact that there were no pedals on the piano, and the instrument itself had a more percussive sound, a more, kind of an aggressive sound. So the whole character of the music is different, even when played on a modern piano. To contrast that with Chopin, the piano is much more developed. You have the pedals to work with. You can have a lot of expressive possibilities with give and take of tempo, the rubato, the liberal use of pedaling, the overt expression, never losing the time or gaining time, but having a little bit of flow with the music, bringing the listener with you. So that's what you want to think about when playing these period styles to get an authenticity. More than that, it really just works better. I think I demonstrated that for you by trying to play Mozart like Chopin and Chopin like Mozart. I'm really interested in the comments if any of you prefer the stylistic flipping that I did here. What are your impressions?